Hello and welcome everyone. Today we have with us two visionary leaders, Ranjeet Pratap Singh, co-founder and CEO of Pratilipi, and Siddharth Roy Kapur, founder and MD of Roy Kapur Films. They are together shaping the future of Indian storytelling. Together they have embarked on a unique partnership to co-develop and produce a slate of films and web series based on some of the most powerful stories from Pratilipi's content library. Congratulations and best wishes to both of you.
Thank you.
Siddharth, I will start with you first. What attracted you to collaborate with Pratilipi, and how do you plan to bring these regional stories to life, cinematically?
See, we're in the business of storytelling and we're constantly looking out for the best stories to be able to tell our audiences. The fact is that the number of people with stories compared to the number of people with the resources to tell the stories is always unbalanced. And the access that the people with the stories have to those with the ability to tell their stories is always limited. We've tried to keep our platform as open as possible to new writers and to storytellers, but you're always going to be limited by the number of people that are able to reach out to you, and things of that nature. What we love about Pratilipi is that it's a platform for storytellers from all across, and not just from the cities, but from places where they might not have access to cities, from rural India, from semi-urban India, and those are the kind of stories that I think audiences are yearning for today. And the fact that you have a platform now with the ability to give you access to those kinds of stories, number one. And number two, for you to have an inbuilt understanding of the relative popularity of each of those stories as well, I think is tremendously valuable. And that's why we felt that this felt like a collaboration that was very, very important to happen and sort of destined to happen in a sense, because what could be a better way in which to do a backward and forward integration, depending on how you look at it, for a story in its journey to be told to as many people as possible.
It's a very exciting partnership, and I look forward to all those films and web series which you are going to produce in the future. And Ranjit, now over to you. I'm sure you would have spoken to a couple of more production houses. Then I would like to understand, why did you choose Roy Kapur Films, and how do you see those collaboration amplifying your regional stories on a global platform?
So first part is the obvious part, like just the reputation and the credibility that Roy Kapur Films has, and that part is the obvious one. The part that is less obvious is that with most other partnerships that we have done in the past, as well as some that haven't been announced, it has always been still, like despite everything else, it has still been that the producer or the owner of the studio is still basically talking about that I think this story is good. Like it's still the same approach. The only difference is that instead of talking to like 10 individual storytellers, now you're looking at 1 million storytellers. But the approach is still that I'm creatively judging whether this story works or not. But in case of Siddharth, he was able to marry that intuition with data. Like Siddharth was one of the very few people that I've met from the media industry, from the traditional side of the industry, who is able to merge these two, that yes, of course, intuition is very important, and yes, of course, data is very important. But when you combine them, it becomes a lot more valuable than either of them individually. I think that is what makes it so much more special.
Now, very interesting. And Siddharth, I think Indian film industry has been shaped by legendary writers like K. Abbas, Salim Javed, Rajkumar Hirani, and today also we have a bunch of incredible talent who can write. They write screenplays, film stories, and all. And this is, I think, and you are kind of going to empower grassroots storytellers who would have otherwise never had a chance to showcase their talent on a global platform. So what challenges and opportunities do you see in bringing these grassroots writers to the screen?
The challenges have always been there. For every K. Abbas and Salim Javed, as you mentioned, there are so many thousands of writers who've not had the access. Of course, these were tremendously talented individuals who you can argue will have come to the surface anyway, regardless, right? But you've got so many thousands and thousands of screenwriters over the decades who might never have had that opportunity that they had. I think a collaboration like this helps you increase the chances of more talented writers getting an opportunity to put their ideas in front of us. And I think that gives me a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, knowing that who knows what diamonds in the rough you might discover as you go forward, because this is a business of people and personalities and the stories that they've lived through. And all the writers that you mentioned have had very rich lived experiences that are not necessarily urban, but that speak to issues in the country, that speak to things that we might not even that we hear about in the news and we read about on an academic basis, but that we are not encountering on a day-to-day basis. So that gives me a lot of hope that if we are able to tap into talent like that, then we'll be telling stories that we probably are not telling anymore.
Very interesting. And Ranjeet, next question to you: what would be the selection process, for the stories, and what role does technology and data play in selecting these stories, which are being developed in web series and films?
So the main part, so there are two parts to this. One part is like what is the viable universe in the first place, and the way we approach it is it's not only about like which stories are the most read. There are other factors which are more important. So like, as a couple of examples, like a story that people are rereading again and again, even if it has had lesser overall number of readers, is probably a lot more powerful than that more people read that story just once. If like 1 million people read a story once versus 100,000 people read it 4 times, chances are that the second story is actually probably more resonating with people. The second is completion rate. Like if 100 people started reading a story, how many of them actually like finish that story? And that is probably one of the most important parts of whether the story is actually like consistently good or not. Like it might have started off nice, but does it actually go with the flow? Then third is reader sentiment. And again, the easy part is just looking at average rating. Is average rating 4.8 or like 3.8? But the harder part is going through the reviews, doing a semantic analysis on that, and then seeing like, do people feel extreme emotions about it? Like, as in one of the best shows, except for the last 2 seasons, was Game of Thrones, right? Like it's not always just positive feelings either. It's like people had extreme emotions, like whether it's sadness, guilt, anger, happiness, joy. It's like when you're immensely feeling those like strong emotions, that means the story is really touching your heart. So a combination of these is how we find out which stories are viable, like which stories are likely to be successful irrespective of the format. That is the part that we are good at. Then the second part is which of these stories are good for AV specific format, whether it's movies or TV shows or web series. That is the part where we are not an expert, but that is where Siddharth and his team is an expert. So they will then look at this short list of stories and figure out which of these stories is viable for a specific format. So that is the 2-step process that we are essentially following.
Yeah, interesting. Siddharth, would you like to comment?
No, I think Ranjeet's put it very, very well. We're not a company, we're not a production company that runs away from data. We embrace creativity and we embrace information. Because when you look at the history of cinema and you talk about the box office collections of movies, that's data, right? But what is that telling you? That's telling you about the popularity of that film. So the fact that Sholay was the most successful film of all time and did a box office of X crores means that many people loved it, watched it once, watched it twice, watched it 5 times. It reached the length and breadth of the country and multiple times over. So similar to what Ranjeet is saying, which is that when you've got such a rich treasure trove of information on the extent to which people have connected with certain stories, it's something that we embrace. That's information that we embrace. And as he rightly put it, once him and his team have been able to curate those stories that they believe are the ones that have touched the most number of people, or the people that they have touched in the most intense way, then we'll figure out the next step of taking which ones to the screens. And that I think it's like a passing of the baton, is the way that we look at it. And I'm sure in the process, the baton will be passed many times both ways, because we intend for it to be a collaboration and we intend for us to work together then on developing these stories into the best rendition of what they can be in the audiovisual medium.
The entire process looks quite fascinating even to me. And Siddharth, how will this collaboration, kind of influence the creative and production process at Roy Kapur Films going forward?
I think this collaboration will be very interesting just from the point of view of being able to get access to many more stories. We already have maybe 7 to 10 scripts that come to us in a week, and the team goes through them. But like I said, those are the ones that have had access to be either being able to get our email ID, being able to get onto our website and sign out a release form and then send the script to us. But there must be so many other stories that we're not being able to access that have the ability to be wonderful, wonderful stories on screens. And this gives us the opportunity to do that. So I think that the creative team and the development team here at RKF is very, very excited about collaborating with the team at Pratilipi to jump into it and to take our first show and make it happen and then move on to the others.
Mm-hmm. And Siddharth and Ranjeet, this question is to both of you. How do you plan to kind of preserve the authenticity of the regional narratives at the global platform?
Siddharth, you want to go first, or do you want?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, if you'd like to.
Well,
I think it's very important when it comes to stories to not to honor what you have liked about it in the first place. I think we can get waylaid in the whole process, and for all the right or wrong reasons, trying to make something more commercial or what you consider to be more commercially viable, trying to be all things to all people because you want to reach as many people as possible. But I've always found that when you retain the authenticity of the seed of the idea or the concept or the story that attracted you in the first place, and you honor that and stay true to it, despite whatever other trappings come along on the way, that is invariably the most successful of the things that you might do. So I think we intend to actually say what attracted us to this story in the first place, and let's not change that. Now, we can embellish it along the way, but that spine should be pure.
I think there are basically three parts. The most important one is what Siddharth already spoke about, that you don't want to mess with the soul of the story or what makes that story viable in the first place. That is maybe 80% of the story in the first place, as in 80% of the reasoning in the first place. But I think the second part, which is important, why we are not developing or producing on our own, for example, is that even though you want to make sure that the soul remains intact and you don't mess with that, you also want to make sure that different formats require their own nuances. So it cannot be that either that you just take the story and copy it scene by scene and say now it's a movie, because different formats require their own nuances. So that is equally important, that you don't want to mess with the actual soul of the story, but you also want to figure out the nuances and make it work for the new format that you're working on, and that format would have its own nuances. So that's the second part. And the third part, I would say, apart from just knowing what a good story is, because we also have access to both data and reviews of that story, we also know which specific parts of the story are resonating the most. So for example, let's say there is a character that people feel particularly strongly about, then can we hash that character out even better, or can we hire an actor which is actually suitable to what people are imagining that character to be in their minds. So that is the third part, that you can have access to those specific nuances about either specific incidents or specific characters, and then how do you utilize that information that you otherwise would not have had. So I think what Siddharth said is 80% of it, and then the other two are somewhat is still important, just not as important.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'm also curious about the target audience. I mean, as far as my little understanding goes, people who are reading Pratilipi might be different from the audiences which go to watch films in the theater or maybe have access to OTT platforms. I mean, very few people are, right now reading stories or reading anything in literature. Do you think that the Pratilipi audience can be extrapolated to your web series and film audiences?
Siddharth, do you mind if I take a step?
Absolutely, please.
Let me start the first part. As of today, about 3 crore people read on Pratilipi every month. So people don't read in India is a misnomer. It's a very lazy approximation. 3 crore is not a very large number, of course, in a country like India, but it's not a small number either. And we are barely just starting. Give it another few years, we should have at the very least at least 10 crore people who are reading on Pratilipi every month, if not more. So that's a reasonable enough sample size. Second, I very strongly believe and have always believed that the best stories are always universal. And my example usually has always been Iron Man. It started as a comic book in US for children in English. Is Iron Man really just a comic book anymore? Is it really just in US anymore? Is it really just for kids anymore? Is it really just in English anymore? The best stories are always going to be universal. Whether we can identify the best stories, whether we have the skill set and the ability to do justice to those stories, I don't know. We will try our best, but I don't know. But if we are really finding the best stories, and if we are really able to do justice to them, best stories were and are and will remain universal no matter what.
Siddharth, you wanted to add something to it?
No, I think Ranjeet has put it really sort of aptly. Honestly, much as the noise that we make as a film industry, 3 crore is pretty much the number of people who watch our biggest movies at the box office in the cinema hall, right? A lot more people watch it on TV and streaming than watch it in the theaters. And, so just to give you a sense of the proportionality of the sizes of the audiences. And also, I think what Ranjeet said is I couldn't agree more. The best stories just travel regardless. I've seen it with Dangal as a film that we made at Disney, where it was a story about a has-been Haryanvi wrestler and his 2 daughters who he was trying to live his dreams out through. What could be more specific, local, hyper-local than that as a story? And for that to go on and do the sort of business it did in a place like China was, unfathomable to us. I can't say we planned it. It happened. It was serendipity that they were able to connect to it. But I think the more specific and hyper-local you are, and the more authentic and rooted and true to the situation a story is, and if the story works, then it has the ability to go anywhere.
Yeah, right. And what kind of remuneration do you plan to offer to your writers?
So in Pratilipi's case, we have always been clear that irrespective of how Pratilipi monetizes, writers always have a revenue share. A specific revenue share depends on writer to writer, because when we acquire a story or acquire the rights to a story, we give X upfront payment and Y royalty. So depending on what upfront payment they want, and different people are going through their own life situations, so we are relatively flexible with that. So depending on how much upfront payment they are taking and how popular the story already is, the royalty percentage would vary. But in every single case, there will not be a single exception where Pratilipi makes money and my writers don't make money.
Have you guys allocated a certain amount of funds for this project, this collaboration, or it will just as the current flows?
I think it'll evolve as we go, because we don't want to restrict ourselves in terms of having a specific size of capital and therefore X number of projects. The fact is that there is a huge demand for great stories today. You've got umpteen numbers of studios and platforms and distribution sort of avenues available. You've got an audience that's hungry for great audiovisual content. So we want to limit ourselves only by our own imagination. I think, if we can come up with, say, 10 ideas in the next 2 years, we'll do it. We've set ourselves a target of 6 over 3 years. And I think that's what we'll try to do. But if we can do more, then so be it.
Yeah. So when can we see your first film and first web series based on Pratilipi's content? And also, can you share the details of your the timelines of your first production?
So we've started our work between the 2 teams on our first project, actually, Charitraheen. And that's the first project that we'll be kicking off with. I won't be able to give you any specific timelines on when it'll be on air yet, because obviously the development cycle is one that takes the time it takes to write a screenplay, to get it commissioned by a platform, or to finance it ourselves, and then to take it to market. It's usually a cycle that lasts a year and a half or so from start to finish. Obviously, we'll try to do it even sooner if we can. But it's important to bring the right talent on board the project, whether that's the writing talent, the directorial talent, the actors, the sort of HODs on the project, that we want to take time on and not have any shortcuts. But that will be the first project that kicks off.
So the last question, how do you plan to select your actors for the film? I mean, will they be from the regional areas or from the national platform?
I think we let the story dictate that. We'll let the story dictate it. Obviously, there'll always be commercial considerations around when you have a project of the scope and scale of at a certain level. You obviously might need actors with a certain name value attached to them that you need to bring on board the project to make it viable. But even those will be someone who suits the role and not a force fit at all. So we'll just flow with it and let the story dictate it. That's how we've always tried to do our casting.
Okay. Thank you, Ranjeet. Thank you, Siddharth, for taking time out speaking with Exchange for Media. All the best to you.
Thanks, Kanchan.
For having us here.
Yeah, Ranjeet. Bye.